Hello everyone and welcome to the Mindful Philosophy Podcast. What if I told you that our ideas are nothing more than weakened copies of our sensory experiences? Can we truly know something without having experienced or felt it? We all have these thoughts, right? Beliefs, ideas, these assumptions we carry around. But do we ever stop to actually think about where they come from? It's a hidden world. And that's exactly what we're exploring today. We're going deep with a philosopher who truly turned our understanding of knowledge upside down. David Hume. Hume's work is still relevant today because he makes us question something we usually take for granted. Where do our beliefs really come from? He makes us question the foundation of everything we think we know. But before we venture deeper, a quick word on this brilliant Scottish philosopher. David Hume, writer, historian, an important figure in the Enlightenment. Born in 1711 in Edinburgh, is a key figure in modern philosophy, known for his innovative thinking from a young age. Hume quickly developed an exceptional intellectual curiosity. At just 25, he completed his masterwork, A Treatise of Human Nature, an impressive accomplishment for his age. However, its publication in 1739 was a complete failure, something he later regretted, feeling he had published his work too hastily. Despite this initial failure, Hume persisted and reworked his ideas, eventually publishing his treatise in several volumes, tackling major themes such as human understanding, passions, and morality. His empiricist approach, based on the idea that all knowledge comes from sensory experience, stood in sharp contrast to the rationalist theories of the time, particularly those of René Descartes. In the previous episode, we explored how René Descartes, with his famous cogito, sought to establish absolute certainty by relying on pure reason. He hoped to rebuild all philosophy and knowledge on this solid foundation, what he called a tabula rasa. But today, we're going to explore a radically different approach, the one taken by David Hume. Hume takes a completely different stance. He firmly argues that all our knowledge comes exclusively from our sensory experiences, what we see, hear, feel, etc. For him, there are no ideas or truths that do not directly derive from sensory experience. It's a powerful idea, and it's had huge ripple effects. We're talking about philosophy, psychology, science, even how we understand our own thinking every day. So much of it traces back to Hume in one way or another. It boils down to one big idea: empiricism. And at its core, empiricism is the idea that all our knowledge, every single thing we know, starts with our senses. What we see, hear, taste, smell, and touch. It's like our senses are these constant streams of information, feeding our brains with raw data about the world. And from that data, we piece together everything. This is where it gets really interesting, because if our senses are the foundation for everything we know, what does that actually mean for how we understand the world? Our senses are like the bedrock of all our knowledge. But how do we go from simply experiencing the world through our senses to forming complex thoughts? That's where Hume introduces two important concepts: impressions and ideas. And they're kind of the secret sauce for explaining how we go from raw sensory data to a complex understanding of the world. Let's break those down. Impressions first. How does Hume define them? For example, the sensation of warmth on our skin near a fire, the pain we feel when we get hurt, or the vivid image of a brilliant sunset, or the taste of a perfect cup of coffee. These impressions are immediate and felt with a particular intensity. They're vivid, strong, and they form our direct encounter with the outside world. They also include emotions like joy, anger, or fear. If you were really holding a cup of coffee, you'd immediately feel the warmth against your fingers. The smell of the coffee would be intense, and the taste on your tongue would be vivid and comforting. That direct, vivid, and tangible experience is what Hume calls an impression. An impression as striking as the one left by my loyal listeners who bought me a coffee via buymeacoffee.com, and a huge thanks to my amazing only 3 YouTube members. You're like the empiricists of my channel, keeping things grounded in reality. Thank you. Coffee and YouTube memberships have never been so precious and exclusive. That's what impressions are. They're those vivid, immediate experiences we get through our senses. They hit us with full force, the real deal right there in the moment. And Hume's saying that those impressions are the foundation for literally everything else we come to know and believe. Then we have ideas, and those ideas, they come from those initial impressions. Remember that perfect cup of coffee we talked about? Close your eyes and try to imagine that steaming cup of coffee. Picture the steam rising slowly. Imagine the rich aroma and the warmth in your hands. That mental image is what Hume would call an idea, a weakened version of the actual experience. But even if you try to bring back that taste, like really imagine it as vividly as you can, it's never going to be as intense as actually tasting the real warm coffee, is it? It's like trying to explain a color to someone who's been blind since birth. Words just don't cut it. So the concept of the idea is just a shadow, a copy of that original vivid impression, a faded photograph. And this is where things get even more interesting, because Hume argues that even really complex ideas, concepts that seem so far removed from basic sensations, can be traced back to those impressions. How do we go from, for example, the feeling of sand between our toes to something abstract like democracy, if that even exists? Seems like a bit of a stretch, right? Or take the idea of a dragon. None of us have presumably come face to face with an actual fire-breathing dragon, but we can still picture one, right? We have an idea of what a dragon is, from books, TV shows like Game of Thrones, etc. And that's Hume's point. We might not have directly experienced a dragon, but our minds take all these impressions we do have, maybe from lizards, birds, fire, even just that feeling of awe or fear we get from stories, and we combine them. We create this totally new idea. It's the same with, say, the idea of an angel. If you've never seen an angel, how can you form an idea of one? For Hume, the idea you have of an angel must necessarily be derived from sensory impressions you've already had. You've seen humans, you've seen bird wings, and your mind combines these impressions to create the idea of an angel. But if that idea can't be traced back to a direct sensory impression, then it has no real foundation and is just a construction of the imagination. So, for Hume, it doesn't hold any real meaning. Our minds, they're like these master chefs, mixing and matching impressions like ingredients to make something totally new. But if all of our ideas come from sensory experience, what about the stuff we can't actually sense? I'm talking about things like justice, morality, and even the concept of God. This is where David Hume really rocked the boat. He went right after philosophers like Descartes, who believed in what they called innate ideas. Descartes was all about those innate ideas. He assumed that we're born with some basic ideas already hardwired into our brains like a preloaded operating system. But David Hume? Nope. Even our most abstract concepts, the ones that feel so fundamental, they're not innate. They're still built from experience, and he uses the concept of God as an example. God is often seen as something totally spiritual, completely beyond the physical world. So if that concept isn't innate, how do we come up with the idea of God, according to Hume? He says, we look around and we see power. We see order. Maybe we experience beauty, and our minds, being the master chefs that they are, take those impressions, those experiences, and combine them. Voila. The idea of a supreme being who embodies all those qualities. It's not like we have a direct sensory experience of God, but we're taking pieces from other experiences, our sense of power, order, beauty, and creating this complex idea. We're like detectives, building a case for God based on the evidence of our senses. But then, what about things like logic and math? Those feel super fundamental, like they must be hardwired, right? I mean, 2 + 2 = 4, no matter what. It's not something we learn just from experiencing the world, is it? Well, even with math, something that feels so solid, so certain, Hume is saying it all comes back to how we interact with the world. It's not that we're born knowing 2 + 2 = 4. It's more like we encounter two things, then two more things, and from there we start to grasp this idea of quantity, of relationships between those quantities. We're building that understanding through experience. Math, in this sense, becomes like a language we develop to describe the patterns we observe in the world. But now, if all our knowledge is built on this foundation of sensory experience, doesn't that make it kind of shaky? I mean, we know our senses can be tricked. Think about those optical illusions, the ones where you can't trust your own eyes. They make you feel like your brain is glitching. This really gets to the heart of why Hume is considered such a key figure in the history of skepticism. He's not afraid to ask, what if our senses, the very things we're relying on to understand the world, aren't always accurate? Are we building this whole tower of knowledge on ground that might be a little shaky and unstable? That's where the implications of Hume's empiricism really start to hit home, because if all our knowledge is ultimately rooted in sensory experiences, and those experiences can be limited, flawed, or sometimes even totally misleading. What does that say about how certain we can be of anything? It's almost as if, instead of passively observing the world, we're actively creating our own versions of reality based on individual sets of experiences and perceptions. And it's an idea that feels so relevant today. We're bombarded with information all the time, news, opinions, data coming at us from every direction. Hume's skepticism is an invitation to be more discerning, more critical of everything we encounter. So it's not just about taking everything at face value, it's about taking a step back and asking those questions. Where is this information coming from? What's the agenda here? And how might my own experiences be shaping how I'm interpreting all of this? He's urging us to be active participants in how we understand the world, not just passive receivers of information. Kind of like how you're actively participating in this channel right now, by hitting that subscribe and like button, showing you're a skeptic smashing misconceptions, and feel free to leave a comment. Or don't, it's totally your call. So Hume was so influential because he wasn't afraid to challenge common sense. He didn't just stop at impressions and ideas. He also tackled concepts like causality. Causality, in everyday life and traditional philosophical thinking, is often perceived as an obvious and necessary relationship between two events. For example, we see that when it rains, the ground becomes wet, and we tend to say that the rain caused the wetness of the ground. Similarly, when we turn on a lamp, we say that pressing the switch caused the light to come on. This idea seems so intuitive that it's hard to imagine it could be questioned. So, are we really seeing a necessary connection between events? Or is it just our minds associating one impression with another? Hume pointed out that we're not actually observing a cause, just a sequence of events. And for him, the very idea of causality is a mental construction based on habit and the repeated experience of consecutive events. Let's take a more concrete example to illustrate this idea. Imagine two billiard balls on a table. We typically say that the movement of the first ball caused the movement of the second. But David Hume would ask, is this really a causal link you're observing, or just an association of impressions? If we observe closely, what do we actually see? Nothing more than a succession of events. The first ball moves, makes contact with the second, and then the second begins to move. At no point do we directly see a force or some invisible energy or a cause and effect relationship, and nothing proves that the next time you strike the ball, the same effect will occur. What's really happening is our minds are creating the idea of cause based on habit and repetition. So this perception of causality is not the result of a direct observation of nature, but rather a mental habit. When we repeatedly see events occurring in a certain order, our mind creates a connection between them. But it's important to note that this connection exists only in our minds, not in the events themselves. So, if we can't directly observe causality like we thought, what does that mean for predicting the future? That is where things get even more interesting. Hume argued that our whole idea of predicting the future is based on this assumption that it'll be like the past. He called that induction, and induction is something we do all the time without realizing it. It's the process by which we generalize from past experiences to make predictions about the future. It's a method we constantly use in our daily lives. For example, we believe that the sun will rise tomorrow because it has always risen up until now. We believe that water will boil when we heat it because that has always happened in the past. So induction is basically how we make sense of the world and make decisions. If you remember my episode on Immanuel Kant, link in the description, when we explained that the time doesn't exist and how we created the concepts of seconds, minutes, hours, and days, we imagined this whole system to organize our lives. It's almost the same concept here. In fact, this is why Immanuel Kant said that David Hume woke him from his dogmatic slumber. Furthermore, Hume pushes us to ask a fundamental question. What guarantees us that the future will always resemble the past? What allows us to say with certainty that events will unfold in the same way in the future? According to Hume, there is nothing in the world or in our experience that can justify this belief. The regularity of events in the past is not proof that this regularity will continue to manifest in the future. In other words, there's no universal law we can point to that guarantees the sun must rise tomorrow, even if it has always done so in the past. It's like that old saying, past performance is not indicative of future results, but on a cosmic scale. Now, Let's take a real-world example that confirms Hume's skepticism about causality. For centuries, people believed that the stars in the night sky were permanent and unchanging. After all, every night, the constellations appeared the same. It became natural to assume that they always would. But in 1604, a supernova appeared out of nowhere, a bright new star where there had never been one. This event shattered the assumption that the stars were eternal and unalterable. People had relied on past observations to predict the future, but Hume would say this is exactly the point. Just because something has always been that way doesn't mean it must continue to be. So this skepticism is known as the problem of induction. Hume argues that our belief in the regularity of future events is based solely on habit and not on reason or rational proof. Causality is perceived as involving a necessary link between two events. But for Hume, this idea of necessity is an illusion. It's simply a mental habit that leads us to believe in this necessity. This necessity is not based on logical certainty but is founded solely on habit. So Hume's problem of induction isn't just about doubting individual predictions but questioning the very process by which we come to know the world. It shows that the confidence we place in induction, and by extension in science and everyday reasoning, rests not on certainty but on habit and expectation. This is the deeper nuance that a fuller exploration of Hume's skepticism reveals. His argument is not only an attack on knowledge of the future, but also on the underlying assumptions of human reason itself, and you'll see how this critique of causality and the problem of induction has profound implications in many fields, such as science, for example. You might say that the scientific method relies heavily on induction. We observe phenomena, we generalize from these observations, and we formulate natural laws based on this generalization. For instance, after observing that objects always fall to the ground when dropped, we formulate the law of gravitation. However, Hume reminds us that these scientific laws are not absolute truths. They are based on our past experiences, but nothing guarantees that they will remain valid in the future. It is always possible that tomorrow, objects will no longer fall to the ground, or that the sun will not rise. Science thus relies on an implicit trust in induction, but this trust is not grounded in rational certainty. It is based on habit, on our tendency to assume that the future will resemble the past simply because that has been the case so far. Let's take a striking example. For decades, it was believed that stomach ulcers were caused by stress or a spicy diet. This seemed to be an established medical truth, but in 1982, two Australian researchers, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren, discovered that ulcers were actually caused by a bacterium. This discovery revolutionized medicine, challenging decades of medical beliefs based on inductive observations. The idea that ulcers were caused by stress seemed so evident based on repeated observations, but it was false. This is exactly what Hume points out. Just because a theory has always worked in the past doesn't mean it will continue to be true. Our understanding of the universe could shift at any moment, and the future can contradict what we have taken for granted. And all that brings us to the so what of Hume's skepticism. It's not about giving up on making predictions, but rather becoming more aware of the assumptions we're making and holding our beliefs a little more loosely. This is what I love about philosophy. It always takes these seemingly abstract ideas and brings them back to something relevant to our lives. So how do we apply Hume's skepticism in a practical way? What's the takeaway here? How does this make us better thinkers? Well, we've gone down this rabbit hole of cause and effect and this whole induction thing to explain that Hume's skepticism isn't about doubting everything, but it's about being more mindful, more critical. Think of it this way. In a world flooded with information, where everyone from news outlets to that friend on social media claims to have the absolute truth, a healthy dose of skepticism is, well, essential. That makes a lot of sense. We're constantly bombarded with information these days, and it's easy to just accept whatever sounds convincing. So how can we actually apply Hume's ideas in our own lives? Well, take the news, for example. Instead of just accepting a headline at face value, ask yourself, what assumptions are being made here? What other perspectives might be missing? Is there more to this story than what I'm seeing right here? It's about digging deeper, questioning assumptions, and not being afraid to say, I don't know enough yet to form a strong opinion. And yes, I can see how that kind of thinking would be invaluable these days. It's so easy to just jump on the bandwagon, especially with everyone shouting their opinions online. And it's not just about news or social media. Think about decision-making in general. Just because a certain strategy worked in the past or a particular investment paid off before doesn't guarantee it will again. And David Hume, this 18th century philosopher, can leave us with such relevant practical advice. It's like Hume is whispering across the centuries, don't take everything for granted, question everything. Hume would urge us to always be open to new information, even if it challenges our previous beliefs. The goal of this podcast is really to make you question a lot of your assumptions about how you process information and how you make decisions. That's the beauty of Hume, and if you're intrigued by any of this, I highly encourage you to check out Hume's work for yourself. It's challenging for sure, but it's also incredibly rewarding. Link in the description box. Hume forces us to confront these fundamental questions about knowledge, certainty, and how we understand the world around us. And while it might be a bit unsettling at first, ultimately embracing a healthy dose of skepticism can make us more discerning, more open-minded, and ultimately better thinkers. A huge thank you to my amazing listeners for joining me on this journey into the mind of David Hume, and expect from me another podcast about Hume's theory of the self and morality. Remember, a little skepticism can go a long way. Until next time, keep those minds curious. Thank you.